This is Lisa from MobileTechReview, and this is the Dell XPS 13 again and again and again. This is like the third generation of this design. Let me know in the comments how you feel about that. It's still a really nice design, so I think most people are okay with it. What's changed this time around? Nothing except for the CPU refresh. This is a big CPU refresh, though, to Intel 8th generation CPUs. Though by name, you would think Intel didn't think so, because we went from 7th generation Kaby Lake to 8th generation Kaby Lake-R. R stands for revision, right? But the CPU performance, if you watch some of my other recent videos with 8th gen Ultrabook dual-core 15-watt CPUs, is very significant, like 40% faster, which is pretty nice. Otherwise, you're looking at the same old here. Maybe if it still sells well, don't change it. Use Dell's attitude. And hey, I get that. Still one of the lighter Ultrabooks, around 2.9 pounds with the touchscreen model, which is what we have right here, which is 1.3 kilograms. It's really not about the weight. There's a lot of 13.3-inch Ultrabooks that weigh around that these days. It's about how small the footprint is, and that still holds true. It's just a petite little thing. It seems more like a 12.5-inch laptop, but it is full 13.3-inch, so still a selling point. Also, the CNC aluminum body with the nifty carbon fiber interior, which we'll take a look at. Same as last gen, though. Backlit, white backlit keyboard here with 1.3 millimeters of key travel, unchanged. Microsoft Precision Trackpad, that's quite good, unless it gets dirty because of the coating on the trackpad. Then it'll get a little wonky, so you have to clean it once in a while. Still also very good. Display options are still the same on this. You have your full HD matte non-touch display, and you have the QHD Plus touchscreen glossy, which is the one that we have this time around. We've reviewed both displays in the past. This time we're just doing the higher end glossy touchscreen model. Still Ultrabook is still available with PCIe NVMe SSDs, and all but the cheaper base model. The 128 gig base model is just a SATA SSD. What does that mean? It's not quite as fast a technology, but most of them have the faster one. RAM is still DDR3 low power, so that hasn't changed either. And you can get it with up to 16 gigs of RAM. It's still soldered on board. The M.2 SSD is socketed for upgrades inside. Killer Wi-Fi, 1535 AC, just like the outgoing model. In fact, Dell is still also selling the 7th generation models. Now the most affordable XPS 13 models are the 7th gen models. Again, with that slower 128 gig SSD. So it starts around $799, but looking at the 8th gen ones, the new ones, that starts at around $1299.99, so it's $1,300 in the US, and goes up from there. You get a pretty nice configuration at that price point, though. For example, we start with a Core i7, that's not a Core i5, and it's the usual for 8th gen 8550U CPU with a low base clock speed, but a very high turbo boost, and as we've seen with other laptops, it stays pretty high. What else do you need to know? How does that 8th gen perform, and has the thermals and the throttling and all that? We're going to find out now. So in case you're new to the Dell XPS 13 line and you haven't seen our previous reviews of it, the highlights are the Infinity Edge display, the nearly no bezel design. That's in part what started this whole bezel-free design that now extends into smartphones. It sure looks cool. And the only drawback is still that 720p chin cam that is below the display. So your jowls, they're there for everybody to see. I hope you're young and better looking than me, because, yeah, a lot of people actually buy an external webcam to deal with that if they have to do a lot of video chatting with folks and they actually care about how they look. Like I said, it's still available with your choice of the matte non-touch display, which some people like who don't want to touch their screens and you don't have any glare there. It's a perfectly lovely display. Or this QHD Plus screen that we have, which is unchanged from the previous model. It's still a Sharp IGZO display. Dell has improved their draconian firmware power management that used to limit display relative to the brightness of the room, even though there was no setting that you were provided with to control that. So they say it's 400 nits up to, we measured 285, which is actually an improvement over previous generations, and that's because they're allowing higher user-controlled brightness. The rest of the specs you can see on screen. The only thing I'd comment on is the color accuracy detail that you'll see there, and that our colorimeter measured is typical of IGZO. It's very bad. All the colors are blown out according to that. You would think it would look like OLED, right, with exaggerated colors. It really doesn't. It looks slightly OLED-y. But when they're all high together, I suppose it kind of evens out, and it can be calibrated into reasonable accuracy for those of you who are into content creation and care about color accuracy. The keyboard has never been one of my favorites, but I don't detest it either. That's mostly because it's very low key travel and it kind of bottoms out in a hard way. It's a little bit hard on the fingers, but now compared to the MacBook Pro, well, it seems like a dream of comfort. So there's that. The keys are nicely shaped and all that sort of thing, and the trackpad's quite good too. It's nice that we have Thunderbolt 3. It is 2-lane, not 4-lane, for those of you who are going crazy with those eGPUs, which now starts to make a little more sense for gaming because the new quad-core 8th generation dual-core Ultrabook CPUs have gotten powerful enough where they won't bottleneck high-end games quite so much. But still, yeah, it's only 2 lanes, so it's really not a good candidate for that sort of thing. More like for Thunderbolt 3 docks, that sort of thing. You can plug whatever you want in Thunderbolt 3. It's a versatile thing. And of course, it also does USB-C, so you can use USB-C hubs and adapters and peripherals. Not that there's a lot of peripherals yet, but still. The thing is built like a tank. It is rigid. It's perhaps a bit Teutonic in the design. It always has been, kind of hard-cut edges on it, that sort of look, but it feels very nice to the touch. And I'm still a sucker for the carbon fiber inside. It looks trick and it feels nice. Gets fingerprinting, but it's easy to clean with a little soft soap and water. So hey, I'm cool with that. We still have DDR3 RAM in here, which is interesting. Low-power DDR3 RAM. I thought they would have moved up to DDR4 like, well, most manufacturers, but maybe that in part explains why we have better battery life here relative to the previous generation, whereas other 8th generation Ultrabooks that we've reviewed recently have about the same battery life as their predecessors. So Dell's doing some pretty good magic when it comes to battery life here. It's still the same 60 watt-hour battery. Still, it comes with the same compact style-in charger. But I've been seeing like an hour to an hour and a half longer runtimes compared to the predecessor. What does that mean? In terms of overall battery life, it really depends on what configuration you get, which processor and which display. Obviously, we're talking about 8th gens only here because that's what we're testing and that's where I'm seeing the improvements, but the display will make a difference. The higher resolution QHD touchscreen will use more power than the full HD. Those of you who've been following the XPS 13 know this already. So I can say for our touchscreen model, which used to be the more challenged one, and certainly we have a high-end configuration, again, Core i7 and all that stuff, I've had no problems hitting around 8 hours with this one. And that's not without trying, without doing any serious power management on it, and with running the brightness at about 40 to 50%, which is a little bit above 100 nits usually that we test at, just because I was giving it a little bit of a harder time because the battery life was so improved, I wanted to see how well it would do. You probably could pull 9 hours on this, no problem. And with the full HD non-touch model, you're talking double digits here. Certainly you should be able to hit 12 hours with that easily, if not longer now. So it's one of the longer running Ultrabooks on the market, which is sweetness. So how about performance? Well, you can see the benchmarks flying across the screen there. It does quite well. As we would expect, we're seeing those 40% and sometimes even more improvements for CPU tests. More importantly, and when comparing it to a true, or what we would have called true quad-core in the old days, the 45-watt CPU, more power that, say, the Dell XPS 15 has and other mobile workstations and gaming laptops, you'll see that there's lots of little peaks and valleys in benchmark graphs showing the CPU doesn't stay at a high clock speed. It has to drop down more often because the base clock speed and the thermal limits here and the power limits also. If this is a 15-watt package, which it is for a 15-watt CPU, it can't use more than that, even if it's being asked to try to perform harder. So it's not as fast as a Dell XPS 15 in real-world use, but it falls somewhere between and closer to an XPS 15 than it does the old XPS 13. And as a cross-platform, real-world kind of test, we've been using Handbrake and taking a 1 gigabyte file, a video file, in MP4 4K format. So that's a pretty decent sized file, long enough to keep the CPU busy. So we can see if there's going to be thermal throttling that's going to affect the overall result or power management stuff. And it did very well. We converted down to 1080p and H.265. Speed is pretty impressive here. You can see slightly over 13 seconds, which is way faster than the outgoing XPS 13 and getting closer to something like an XPS 15. So real world tests are good. The fan, you will hear the fan. The fan will be chugging if you're making it work hard. Otherwise, it's pretty quiet. But if you're outputting, rendering video, for example, if you're playing games, that sort of thing, yeah, you'll certainly hear it. It's not exactly quiet. But like I said, in a normal everyday use, you know, you're streaming a video or you're using Word or something like that, you won't hear the fan at all, which is good. The bottom, miraculously, does not get hot to touch. I'm not even going to show you a thermal picture because there's ain't nothing to see here. It stays so surprisingly not beyond warm, even when it's working hard, that it's impressive. The less good news, or depends on how you feel about this, is that the CPU frequently hits, when doing things like benchmarking or pushing it hard, the thermal limit, which is 100 degrees centigrade. At that point, the machine will throttle to prevent any damage to the CPU and to other components. And it's nice that they don't aggressively throttle way sooner than that when you might want to get performance out of it, but it does push into the upper 90s if you're really, really making it work hard. And I don't mean running multiple synthetic benchmarks simultaneously. That's silliness. I mean real world testing, a single benchmark running, outputting a video, that sort of thing. So it does get a little toasty there, that CPU. It worries me a little bit. But in terms of performance, it's certainly giving you its all. We saw some thermal throttling happen. We saw occasional power limit throttling. What does that mean? That means, like I said, it's only allowed to use 15 watts of power. So if any situation calls on it to do more than that to try to reach a performance goal, well, it's just going to limit itself to the 15 watts of power. So that's nothing wrong with the machine there necessarily at all. In fact, it's not. It's just the way things are. And that's going to happen a lot more on a 15-watt Ultrabook than it would on a 45-watt XPS 15 or some other mobile workstation with a higher wattage quad-core CPU. The graphics are still 620 Intel UHD instead of HD. Guess what? Intel has said they're the same. It's just clocked 100 megahertz higher. It's fine for casual games, even older games. You can play Skyrim on this at low to medium settings just fine. And things like League of Legends, yes, even a little World of Warcraft, especially if you're willing to drop Warcraft down to lower resolutions. You're certainly not going to be playing a QHD+. You might want to play Warcraft at 720p, but you can see League of Legends running pretty well here. So that's the Dell XPS 13. And again, like I said, they don't have a lot of high-end competition anymore in the traditional laptop segment. So many have gone into convertibles like the HP Spectre X360, the Lenovo Yoga Y920, and even the 720, those sort of things. So Razer Blade, the Stealth line model that we showed, is certainly a competitor with a slightly wider footprint if you go for the 13.3-inch one. The MacBook Pro, still a very traditional laptop there. At least this one has touch compared to the Mac, which obviously doesn't have touch other than the little touch bar strip. And so thus, Dell still has a pretty captive audience in the Windows world. For those of you who just want the smallest traditional laptop you can get, that is this. It's still a fantastic machine. It's still hard to beat. The battery life has even improved, which I really don't think has to do with the 8th gen CPUs, because none of the other 8th gen models we've reviewed have shown significant battery life improvements. Dell has done things elsewhere to improve the battery life. So it's not cheap when you're talking about the 8th gen models, but it sure is good. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more cool tech videos, and thumbs up if you like this vid. Oh, and happy Halloween.